Now we'll continue with Justin Di Mayo from Lebanon. Justin is the co-founder of ACT for the Disappeared, and she's going to share her experience in the
Thank you.
The field.
Thank you very much. So I will present. So thank you again to the organizer of this conference. I will present the work of ACT for the Disappeared, the Lebanese association created in 2010 to support the families of the missing and contribute to clarify their fate. So my presentation will not be academic at all. ACT is a small local association with very low support, but so I will present small-scale project, but that shows the power of storytelling and how it contributed to some achievements in Lebanon. I will just give a few information about the context, because I think that Mona Halak yesterday already introduced the context in Lebanon. So in Lebanon, the 15 years of multi-sided armed conflict officially ended in 1990 with imposed silence on the victims and on society. The tariff agreement that put officially an end to the conflict organized power sharing between the former warlords and gave birth to a fragile coexistence and precarious civil peace that continuously get disrupted by new rounds of violence. 13 years after the end of the war, the fate and whereabouts of the 17,000 people who went missing remain unknown, and there is still no state commemoration of the victims. The wounds are not healed, and for many, the conflict never ended. In Lebanon, a lot of civil society initiatives to deal with the past happened, and long-lasting efforts to raise awareness of the problem and deal with the past. Families of the missing have been demonstrated for more than 30 years. They even established a permanent seat in the center of Beirut in front of the UN building, but never got any answers on the fate of their loved one. So it proved to be very difficult to create a rupture and break the silence because of many challenges. I will just present some of these challenges. The first one is the fact that the victims' groups are divided across communities and give rise to competing narratives where the other group or the other community or communities are stigmatized. These historical myths are being regularly activated by political figures in Lebanon and provide fertile ground for mistrust and conflict. Also, often the sense of membership and belonging to one's community or political group is stronger to solidarity with other victims. The second main challenge is that the past is still experienced by most people as destabilizing the fragile coexistence. Any attempt to reveal the crimes is seen as a way to stigmatize the entire group. This context makes the debate on the mass graves and alleged location where the words disappeared were buried so difficult. The last challenge that I want to mention is the fact that even though there are many academics who produce research papers on the war, there are very few data on the violences committed, the consequences on the civilians, and the number and names of the victims. For example, we still have no list of missing people in Lebanon. We don't have a mapping of grave sites, and most of the physical reminders of the war have been erased. So it's very challenging. These challenges led us to develop new strategies to engage grassroots participation and dispel the threatening connotation of digging with the past. These challenges shaped the storytelling initiative that the Association ACT for the Disappeared initiated. The main objective of this storytelling initiative are to promote trauma healing by opening a space, allowing people to share their personal experience of the conflict, It's also to document the conflict, and lastly, to forge understanding and tolerance among communities. So the first project that I would like to present is a digital memorial, Fusat Amal. It means space for hope, hope to have the missing recognized, and hope to have their fate and whereabouts revealed. So Fusat Amal is an online memorial. We visit the families of the missing at their home, and we listen to their personal stories. Based on the information we collect, based on their testimonies, we create a profile page for the missing, where a space is dedicated to tell their personal stories and to put photos and testimonies of their families. So the testimonies can be poem, can be a letter, just a testimony. So this is an example of a profile page that is created on the digital memorial. You can see that there are general information about the missing, and there is a space for to describe the missing person and the circumstances of the disappearance. And there is a space for photos and testimonies of their families. So after creating this profile page, what we do also is we have published for more than 2 years, once a week, the story of a missing person. And for the family, it was a very important process because they needed this recognition, and they were very happy to have the stories of their loved ones shared to the public and recognized. So the question is, why a virtual memorial? Why virtual? One of the main reasons is that there is no neutral space in Lebanon. All spaces are politicized, and we needed a space that all victims across communities could appropriate. So that's why we developed this online memorial. There are other memorials, local memorials in Lebanon, but most of them are to remember victims from specific community, and they are being used for political purpose, for most of the time for attacking the other community they consider as their enemy. Virtual also because the families of the missing didn't want a physical memorial that could jeopardize their demand to know the fate of their loved one. They refused to have the authorities co-opt the memorial and use it to close the file and escape from its responsibility to investigate the fate of the missing. So we consulted with the families, and this was a very clear demand to avoid any physical memorial that could be used by the authorities to escape from their responsibility. And the last objective of this virtual memorial was also to not only to collect the list of names to recognize those who disappeared, but also to provide the space for their families to feel heard. So the process in this project, the process is much more important than the result. The fact that we are visiting the families, taking the time to listen to their stories, and to listen to the consequences of the disappearance on their lives is very important. They needed that, and after being silenced for so long. So I will just talk a bit about the achievements of this project. First of all, through the collection of these stories, we created an important database of the missing. We documented their identities, which, by the way, contradicts the common belief in Lebanon that the missing were fighters and went missing during the fighting. Through collecting these stories, we realized that most of them were civilians, among them women and children. So this was a very important step. We also documented through these stories the places where people were kidnapped, checkpoint detention centers, and gather information also about the perpetrators. And in the Lebanese context, where there is very few documentation about all these aspects, it was a very important achievement. And all these data that are gathered through these testimonies will be used to contribute to the efforts to clarify the fate and whereabouts of the missing. The other achievement is the project enabled to accumulate more support from society for the family's demand to know the fate and whereabouts of the missing, because people could relate to these personal stories of children, mothers, students, fathers who were kidnapped on their way to work, to university, and to their villages to visit their families. So it forged empathy through personal stories. The project also engaged the youth, and it's quite critical in Lebanon because there is the young generation have no knowledge of the issue of the missing and more generally of the civil war. This part of Lebanon history is not addressed in history curriculum, and with the exception of Beit Beirut that Mona presented yesterday, there are very few sites of memory that fill in this gap. So with the digital memorial, we try to engage the youth in an intergenerational dialogue about the war. So we went to universities and to school, and we trained them to collect the stories of the missing. So they visited the families in their communities and in their neighborhoods. And the stories they collected were used to create a profile page on the digital memorial, but also were presented in their schools and in universities with the presence of the families of the missing. So it was, for us, the digital memorial was a very strong awareness tool and also a very strong way to engage actively the new generation in this process. The other project I want to present is a project that we are implementing in partnership with the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's called Empty Chairs Waiting Families. It addresses the psychological needs of the families because no matter how much time has passed, the families experience ongoing trauma. Most of them restrict their social lives or disregard their own emotional needs because they feel that by taking pleasure in activities, they are betraying the memory of the missing person. The relatives of the missing also tend to feel alone and isolated in their suffering. Most of the time, their community does not understand their struggle. So this project aims to address the psychological needs of the families through offering them a safe environment to express and lessen their isolation and create a network of support. Supporting them also in developing positive coping mechanisms, and lastly, giving a meaning to their experience and empowering them by creating commemorative artwork that voice their feeling and honor their loved ones. So here you can see families of the missing working on within this art therapy project. So they participate in art therapy session, which guides them to express through a memorialization artwork. In consultation with the families, it was decided to use the support of a metal chair that represent for them the empty chair left by the missing person. So they design a chair for each of their missing loved one. So here you can see one of these chairs, and next to it is the story of the missing person and the experience of their loved one. This project also contribute to forge understanding and tolerance among victims and among communities. Families see that loss has been experienced by all. They go beyond the very group community-specific stories of victimization toward common understanding. The achievement of this project, the project created bonds between victims across communities and engaged them to see the many aspects of their joint history and their common suffering. Also, families who never mobilized or those who stopped mobilizing years ago because of disappointment and growing despair engaged again in local memorialization activities and in advocating for their right to know. Their wide mobilization contributed to the recent passing of the law for the missing and disappeared in Lebanon that was pending for years in the Lebanese parliament. So it's a big achievement. I will just mention lastly a campaign, the last campaign that we launched in Lebanon. On April 13, 2018, which is the anniversary of the outbreak of the civil war, we installed figurines representing the disappeared person in 35 different places in Beirut and the suburb. You can see here the figurine. So we placed this 35 figurine in different places in Beirut and suburb where people were kidnapped. Each figurine bears the following message. Here people were abducted. Here or there, it is time to know what happened to them. The objective was to make present the missing, to materialize, to make visible the loss and the violence and combat denial. So this campaign not only reasserted the responsibility of the Lebanese authorities to investigate the fate and whereabouts of the missing, it also called for the citizens to participate in dealing with the past and sharing their stories. So for the duration of the campaign, a bus toured Beirut and its suburb with the following message: in order to turn the page of the war, heal its wounds, let us contribute to unfolding the truth. The bus stopped in several neighborhoods and residents were invited to embark and share their own stories of the conflict. A selection of these testimonies collected before and during the campaign were added on an online memory map that we created for the campaign. It includes the perspective of the victims as well as the motives and perception of the person responsible for committing the violation. So here, for example, you can, it's the memory map, so you can go online and hear the testimony of former combatants who explain his perspective and his experience of the war. Here, you also have the name and the stories of the people who have been kidnapped at the same place where the former combatant was stationed during the war. Sorry. So just to finish, for us. Collecting the stories of the missing and collecting the stories of former combatants is also very important because it contributes to clarify the fate of the missing. From these testimonies, we are now working on mapping the detention centers, the checkpoints, and the grave sites, and it's very crucial today in Lebanon because a lot of grave sites have been already destroyed because of construction, and we need urgently to map these graves in order to protect them in view of their future exhumation. So these two aspects of healing, but also of documenting what happened in order to preserve this information and contribute to clarify the fate of the missing.
Thank you very much.